Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us on Let's Try This Again.
Again.
Another night, our third night together.
hmm
You know, there's a lady who she actually attends my church. Her name is Terry Morgan, and she will always say the simple biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And um, the simple biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. But um, I finally figured out that it was George Bernard Shaw who was the one who she was quoting from, and I think she had a very good point. When we are involved in the process, it's easy for us to go away thinking, well, I know that they understand me. I expressed myself. I laid it all out.
Yeah.
And yet what we believe that they've heard and what they actually heard and believed us to be saying can be completely different things.
That is, I think, is probably more common than we actually really even are aware of or know. That happens a lot in the communication back and forth with people. And this is not just something that happens in marriage or raising of children. This happens when we're on our jobs. This happens in church, right? My goodness, it happens everywhere. It happens in school. So there is no place where the discussion of communication does not come to a head. So I know that this is going to be a very important topic tonight.
But before we jump into that, just why don't you give us a few points on what we talked about leading up to this presentation yesterday?
Oh yeah. So last night, if you haven't had a chance to look at the presentations, the first night we talked about self-awareness. You can go back and check that out. The second night on Monday, we talked about conflict. And conflict, of course, there are very few of us who enjoy it, who think it's a good thing, but we know that
there are some who do.
Yeah, true. And it's a part of life, right? And so it's all about knowing how, right, to have conflict. And so we talked about some of the things that bring about conflict that make it difficult, right, for people to be able to do the thing we're going to talk about tonight, right, which is the dangers of labeling. Right. That's when we put a note on someone's head, and that is what impacts how we listen and how we hear them. It can cause a lot of different things. It actually will stop us from actually investigating, asking questions, awaiting a perspective, right? Because I know what I know, right? That label about you is up there, and it impacts our perspectives and our expectations of other people.
Now, somebody brought out in the comments last night, and I think this is important, that there's a fine line between labeling and knowing the audience that you're speaking to. And those things may be a little bit different, but there is actually truth in that.
Yeah.
There is a fine line between labeling and expecting that an audience is going to have certain ideas and what have you.
Right. And so we also talked about how in that same vein, when we're talking about conflict, a lot of times what ends up happening is that some of us actually need conflict, right? We have dysfunction within our relationships with people. And that's actually what leads to the conflict, especially when we're in relationships with people who change, right? We talked about codependency and how that's very, it shows up, right, in our relationships with people. And codependency is, I need you to be broken. I need you to be helpless. I need you to be an alcoholic or a drug addict or just broken, right?
So I can fix you.
And the minute that you heal, the minute that you actually discover, yourself, and you are actually, able to stand within yourself, and you don't need that codependent relationship anymore, that actually becomes a negative. We talked about the crisis and the critic relationship. We talked about that. So it was a lot. And then lastly, we talked about how when you're in conflict, taking ownership.
Yeah.
What is that 1%?
We talked about looking for your 1%. Another thing we talked about was that, because we are Christian, and even though the principles we're sharing are applicable across, we believe, all facets of life, and it doesn't matter whether you are from the same faith community as we are or not, but we believe that the principles are, in fact, they're applicable. And so we shared that people are God's alphabet.
Ooh, yeah.
Many people would just love to hear from God. Just speak, Lord, for your servant hears.
Yes.
Speak in lightning and thunder and whatnot. And God is like, no, I'm going to choose to speak, and my alphabet will be people. I'm going to use people to be able to communicate with you.
Yeah.
And how few of us actually recognize that, and we're looking for something beyond what God is actually saying to us through the people that we're in relationship and in community with.
The thing that I thought about last night, we didn't actually bring it up, was it's funny that we find ourselves searching horoscopes and searching all of these things, right?
Looking to the stars.
For the things that people have already told us about ourselves, and it's like, nope, I don't trust what you got to say about me. And God help us that we live in community with people and we cannot receive from them. Right? A perspective that is not matching our own. And that's not what God would have, right? That is why he put us in community, so that my perspective is not the only perspective, that I need to be willing to see other people's viewpoint of me and how I show up in the world. And it's not easy.
The beautiful thing about that is when I accept that, when I receive that, because when we talked about self-awareness, there's the inner awareness and then there's the external.
Yeah.
When I receive, I actually have a greater amount of self-awareness, because it's not just my perspective, but it's the perspectives of the people that I'm in community with added to my perspective. And it gives me a more realistic vision of actually who I am. And like you said, how I show up.
And that's not easy. I think everybody goes through that point where you feel like you know who you are, you know what you said, you know. And it's humbling to be able to say, man, you know what? Let me pray about that, and let me actually see. And we shared that as well, that before you actually seek to really actually have this conflict, be willing to pray about it, right? Be willing to seek God and say, you know what? Is this true? And I love the story you share often when you're preaching. There was a story of this gentleman who, I guess, all these people had this. How was it?
Well, he received a letter, and this letter was outlining some challenges that he was having with his wife.
Yeah.
And of course, because he thought that, well, nobody should know the challenges I'm having with my wife. And the long of, or the short of the long is that ultimately he ends up sharing the letter with his wife. And as he shares the letter with his wife, he's denying its truth. His wife pops up and says, that is the truth. And he recognizes that the person who wrote the letter, his friend who delivered the letter, and his wife have all testified that this is true. And he's the only one that's holding out, saying it's not.
Yeah.
It was 3 against 1.
Oh my goodness. So that's not easy, right? But the beauty is that is what relationship is about and what it's for us to grow. Okay. So that is just a recap a little bit of the last couple of nights, but we are moving on. We are going into something that is vital. Across so many different layers. And I tell you, even while we were going through this, I was just thinking to my mind, like, this is wild, right? How communication, oh my gosh, it plays a role on more than just the husband and wife level, the children. Well, let's get into it. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah. And the first part, our on ramp, as we head into the discussion on communication, is actually about culture. It's about culture. And some of you are like, well, what
communication got to do with culture?
What we want to make clear, and we talked about this, is that just because you're the same ethnicity doesn't necessarily mean that you have the same culture.
That's right.
Just because the color of your skin and the language that you speak is the same, it doesn't mean that you have the same culture. And we'll share a little bit of this with you. And what we're sharing is part of it is from cultural quotient, cultural sensitivity, and whatnot. So we're going to put a slide up.
Now, hold on. You said a word, and I know that there are people who have these little ears, right? And when they hear certain things, they're like, I don't want to. No, this is something that is dealing with life, right? And when we talk about cultural sensitivity, we're talking about across the board, right? Because how many of us work with people from other cultures, go to church with people from other cultures? How many of us live, probably?
Let's clarify that.
Yeah.
If you work with people other than the people who raised you and grew up in your house with you, then you work with people from other cultures.
Boom.
There it
you go.
is. As simple as that.
And of course, it can go broader and broader and broader. But make no mistake about it. Every single human being works with people, lives with people, and dialogues with people from different cultures.
So the cultural dynamic is extremely important. And before we jump into the specifics, just to emphasize this, imagine that you were dropped on an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean,
during winter,
the Atlantic Ocean. No, it doesn't matter.
I'm with it if it's about getting up. Okay.
But imagine you're too enthusiastic. But imagine you're dropped on an island.
Yeah.
And there's people there.
Yeah.
And you see the people and you need help, but they don't speak your language and you don't speak their language.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So imagine the difficulty that you would encounter, and you're the only one who speaks your language that's there, and all of them seem to be able to understand one another and speak one another's language, but you're the individual who is the outsider.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine what that is like, that gives us a very real example of what it means to experience cultural dynamics that will affect the way that we communicate. Now that one uses language, but you know, what we're going to be talking about as we unpack this a little bit more, we can actually speak the same language, but still run into some of the same difficulties that the individual who is dropped on this island that's inhabited by people that speak a different language would run into.
Yeah.
So now, first, I want to apologize for the size of this. This is very small, but remember, we asked you all to register, those who might be viewing but who did not register. We said the benefit of registering is that we are going to share with you at the end of our time together some of these things, and this will be one of the things that we share with you, so you'll have an opportunity to look more closely at it yourselves and to delve into it. So maybe you can blow up your screens or something like that. But anyway, we want to touch on 1, 2, 3, 4, about 6 or 7 different cultural dynamics.
Yeah.
So there are those of us who have an individualistic cultural dynamic versus those who have a collectivist cultural dynamic.
And I just want to bring out that the reason why we're talking about these, going back to what tonight is about, it's about communication, guys. So make sure you keep that in the back of your mind. All of these things play a part in our communication. Absolutely.
So the person from the individualistic perspective has an emphasis on individual goals and individual rights. The person from the collectivist culture has an emphasis on group goals and personal relationships, right? So if individual goals and individual rights are at the top of my list, but group goals and personal relationships are at the top of your list, you might say, well, let's wait for Jim and Heather to catch up with us.
Right.
And I'm like, Jim and Heather should have been here. Let's go. You know, if we don't make it to the meeting on time, it's going to look bad on us.
Yes.
And my promotion is going to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
And then there are low pressure or low power distance versus high power distance. The high power distance has an emphasis on differences in status. Superiors are the ones who make the decisions. The low power distance has an emphasis on equality, and there is shared decision making.
Wow. How does that show up in, like, you know, I grew up, right, in a home or in a cultural context where, like what the older people say goes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that is it. They're superior. They're the ones that make the decision, not you.
Children ought to be seen
and not heard.
Right. So, okay, but let me give you another example of that. Let's say you're in a meeting and the meeting was supposed to start at 7 p.m. Like, our meeting didn't start on the first night. We had technical difficulties. But anyway, meeting is supposed to start at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
And it's 7:07 and the meeting still hasn't started. So those who are from the high power distance are looking at their watches and they're saying, hey, look, you're the boss, start the meeting.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
You don't need to wait for
We don't need to wait for anybody else. The most important person is here. The ultimate decision maker is you. Go ahead and start the meeting. But those who are from a low power distance, dynamic, what they're going to say is, wait a minute, we need Robert, and we need Sydney, and we need Jimmy, and we need everyone to be here before we move forward.
Yeah.
Why? Because everyone's input is equally
what makes
important, right? And that's how we'll make the best decision. So again, you can be frustrated with those who don't want to start until everybody shows up. Meanwhile, you're saying, hey, look, I got somewhere to go after this.
And it also, and again, it points out that there's this mindset of hierarchy, right? The superiors make the decision, so that's an interesting dynamic that plays out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there is low uncertainty avoidance, and there's an emphasis on flexibility and adaptability versus high uncertainty avoidance, where there is an emphasis on planning and predictability. Have you ever been in a relationship with someone who says, why aren't we more spontaneous? I just want someone who can just come in and say, well, let's do this. We've never tried this before. Or we need more spontaneity in our relationship.
Yeah.
And then there are others who are saying,
I need to know when, I need to know what, I need to know where, I need to know
how much it's going to cost.
And how much is it? Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I don't like finding things out after. I need to know now. Right.
Yeah. No surprises. No spontaneity. We avoid that like the plague. These are literally cultural differences.
Yeah.
And they manifest themselves in a variety of ways, but it goes back to the way that we think and the way that we process. There are those who are from the cooperative dynamic versus those who are from the competitive cultural dynamic.
Ooh.
The cooperative dynamic has an emphasis on collaboration, nurturing, and family, where the competitive cultural dynamic emphasizes competition, assertiveness, and achievement. All right.
Now, this is a deep one, because this shows up in various stages of life. I think about children. You know what I'm saying? Where they could be in this and they don't even have the capacity to even know that this is what's happening, right?
Yeah.
In the dynamic of them playing together and doing things together. And there are those who want to play. Let's just play to have fun. You know what I'm saying? Let's let her win. Let's all. And then there's other children like, no, we must win. Our team must win, right? That. And now adults, you think adults experience the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The next one is there are short-term cultural dynamics versus long-term cultural dynamics.
This is a good one.
The long-term emphasizes long-term planning and success that comes later, where the short-term emphasizes immediate outcomes, success in the here and now. Just a quick note, we do want to hear from you guys. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can certainly comment. Now, in order for you to comment, you may need to be signed in.
Yeah.
And in order for you to comment,
I'm not sure.
Or you may need to actually be a subscriber to be able to comment. We're also available on Stamina for Life, the Facebook page of Stamina for Life, and you can make comments there as well. And the reason is we're going to ask you to answer something about what we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
So there's an emphasis on immediate outcomes for short term, and the emphasis is on long-term planning for the long-term cultural dynamic. So I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah.
As a church, and I'm speaking merely right now in my context, my professional context. As a church, whenever we do things, we tend to focus mostly on short-term outcomes. We did program X. It cost us X amount. What were the results of that? Now, we just finished program X yesterday. And we're already asking what the results are from the program. So that's a very short-term dynamic versus something that is more long-term. Now, we were talking in the biblical context. What did we talk about in the biblical context in terms of the short term versus long term?
I really believe that the disciples, right, and Jesus, and maybe even broader than the disciples, right, had this expectation as well. They dealt with this whole short term, long term thing. Jesus here walking on the planet, right? It was obvious that the disciples thought, listen, all right, let's take this thing over. Let's get this thing done. Are we going to take over the capital? You know what I'm saying? You're going to take over the kingdom, get you your crown. And let's go ahead and let's get our positions put in place, right? Well, you came here so that we could take over. Let's get it done. What's taking so long? And what they did not understand is that Jesus, while he was actually in the immediate, right? It's not that he didn't care about the immediate, because you shared some really beautiful stories about that that showed that he actually did care, right? Yeah. Healings and different things that, yes, I'm with you. I see you. Yes, feed the 5,000. People are hungry. Yes, people are sick. Let's heal them. But he also was trying to help them to understand that he had a long-term goal that did not fit their, what you want to call it, present ideas or expectations about what was supposed to happen.
Yeah, and I think Jesus gives a beautiful example in the Gospels of ministering to people in the immediate sense, as an incentive for them to invest in his long-term goals. And so I think that's a beautiful thing, because remember, our conversation is about communication.
Yeah.
So we want to take into consideration our cultural perspective, but we also want to take into consideration the cultural perspective of those who we are working with, those who we are in community with, and we want to be able to kind of speak to two worlds, as it were.
I think this is actually also something that we could speak to in regards to those when it comes to their jobs, right? Their places of employment or occupation. I think that it's so important to remember that sometimes we find ourselves working for places, right, that obviously have a short-term goal, and I'm a long-term thinker, or vice versa. I find myself as an employee or an employer, and I'm employing someone who has a short-term, but I'm a long-term, you know what I'm saying? So I think that it's important to actually take that into consideration, because a lot of people find themselves frustrated in the places where they work, with the people they're working with, the company, or, you know what I'm saying? And so it's this clash, and you're like, man, what is it? Sometimes that's the clash. The clash is not so much that either of you are wrong. It is just that the goals, right? You're a long-term thinker, or you're a short-term thinker, and the place that you're working for or the people you're hiring don't operate in that mechanism,
So listen, when it comes to people serving in certain positions, this is it's extremely important for us to know or to be aware of the various different cultural mindsets, because you can't operate an organization based on, do we have enough for today? If you are running an organization, you need people who are able to think not just about today, because today does matter, but we need people who are also able to think about, what's going to happen 2 years down the line, what's going to happen 3 years and 5 years and 10 years out. Because if you are only operating with a today, right now mentality, you will ultimately find yourself on the side of the road next year or 2 years down the line, because I only worried about, did we have enough gas to make it from here to here? Right. So these things, these cultural things are extremely, extremely important. A few more before we move on. There's low context, direct, and there's high context, indirect. The low context, direct, the emphasis is on explicit communication. Words, I did not say that. You said this. And the high context, indirect, the emphasis is on indirect communications. What was the tone?
Right.
What was the context? What were the facial expressions? Like what was the tenor of the conversation?
Man, and we were just talking about this because I recently had an experience like that, right? And I tend to be that person. I'm very much
You tend to be what person?
I'm a direct, right? Or I'll just say whatever comes to my, my mind, or I'll, when I'm talking to people, I'm looking at them, and it's interesting when someone reminds you or tells you, like, listen, this is actually what I was picking up on. And I think there's a lot of people who culturally deal with this, right? There are some cultures who are loud, or some cultures who are more, and again, this is not about ethnicity,
the color of your skin,
right? Because it's never good to make blanket statements like that. However, there are certain cultures, right? Cultural dynamics where that is just how people, right? That's work, but that may work over here, but that may not work for Bobby or Susie or Latasha. You know what I'm saying? And in the realms of communication, I think that what helps is, one, going back to some of the things we talked about before, being willing to receive that communication from people, for them to let you know, like, listen, this is how you came across to me. And you're like, well, that's not how but it ain't always about what you you felt,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and there are certain parts of the world that you can go to
Yeah.
where the protocol has to be followed because the protocol
Yes.
communicates as much or even more than the actual words that are used. And so it's just important for us to be aware of that.
Question for those of you who are watching, if you can make a comment in the comment section, what type of, are you a low content direct person, or are you high context indirect? So again, are you a low context direct, right? You are explicit on communication and words, or are you a high content indirect? Your emphasis is not on the words, but it's on the tone and the context. All right.
Yes, yes. And we'd like you to share any of the ones that we've touched on.
Yeah.
If you feel like this is me, go ahead and share which one you think you are. Then this one right here, extremely important.
Yeah.
There are some whose cultural dynamic is on being, and there are others whose cultural dynamic is on doing. Those who have the cultural dynamic of being, they have an emphasis on quality of life, while those whose emphasis is on doing, they are concerned about being busy and meeting goals. Now,
you got to talk about this in the world that we're living in today.
I think, and again, not to make too, not to brush or paint with too broad a stroke, but
you've had some experience.
Millennials and Gen Zers tend to be focused more on being, while Boomers and even Gen Xers tend to be focused more on doing. And so if you're a millennial or a Gen Zer, you have parents or grandparents who are like, look, when are you going to get that job? You know,
get them benefits.
What type of benefits, what type of retirement plan? And you need to buy a house, because once you buy the house, then that's going to set you up to be able to retire. And you need to start paying on it as quickly as you. And the millennials and Gen Zers are like, nah, I don't want to work a job that I'm not feeling.
Yeah. And I'm not laughing at you if you're a millennial, please don't. But
your stomach is going to feel empty because you ain't going to have any food in it because you don't have a job. Right. You need to get out of here and do something. So there is a push from one generation to say, hey, get out there and do something. But the younger generation, millennials and Gen Zers, are like, man, I can't work in a factory for 30 years if it's destroying me inside to go to work every day.
Yeah.
I need a job I love.
Yeah. Now, I think it's so, when we talk about communication, these particular groups, actually, it's really good that we talk about this, because we're at a really interesting precipice in our Earth's history, right? Because I think that the less that those two groups talk, the less that they understand one another. And I actually agree with both, to be quite honest with you. Yeah. I can understand our precious, baby boomer generation. I really can, because of the things that they experienced, the things that they went through. And if it were not for, it's almost like, I hate to put it, it's almost like survival mode, right? It's because of a lot of those sacrifices of working at jobs that they didn't necessarily love, didn't necessarily like, you know what I'm saying? But it was because they did that they were able to do a lot of the things and afforded their children and grandchildren to do some of the things that they do. However, the flip side
is that millennials and Gen Zers listen to parents and grandparents who had dreams of doing things that they never actually attempted to do.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And they talk to parents and grandparents who, even though they're retired and they've got the house and they, whatever the case may be, they don't hear someone who has a sense of fulfillment.
Yes. And they also witnessed a lot of other things that were unhealthy, which is a loss of health, right? Work yourself to death. You know what I'm saying? Sickness and disease, or mental or emotional breakdown. They witnessed families fall apart, or people complaining about, the relationships and all of those things that they were in, but you stick it out. Even if we're really going to be honest, talking about abuse and things of that nature, there was rhetoric centered around, you just stick it out,
Or I'm so frustrated with the people at work that I take it out on the people at home.
Right.
So they're like, no. I don't want to go that direction.
Right. But again, the flip side with the millennials, the beauty of being able to make a choice about your future and choosing what you love versus what you have to do. That's a beautiful thing. But the scary part for our baby boomer generation is that, can we depend on you?
Yes.
Right. Because if we can't depend on you to show, because one day you may feel like, man, I just don't want to be here.
Right.
I'm not going to show up to work. Or one day, and we deal with it in church environment and things of that too. Right. It's like, man, we want to surrender and give over to you. But man, we don't know whether or not you are going to be there, you know?
Right.
And I think it's just this back and forth, you know?
And all of these things, again, our topic is communication. All of these things affect the way that we communicate with one another.
Yeah.
Now, when we send you this information, you'll see that there's the universal and the particular cultural dynamic. There's the neutral, non-expressive, and the affective, expressive cultural dynamic. There's the monochronic, linear, and the polychronic, non-linear. And one of those, when it comes to the monochronic and polychronic, the monochronic emphasizes one thing at a time, punctuality, work and personal life should remain separate. And the polychronic has an emphasis on multitasking, interruptions are okay, work and personal life are combined. So,
and I see here a comment from Miss 240. She says, it says younger generations are growing up with employers who also aren't loyal or rewarding of loyalty.
Yeah,
that's true. So everything's changing, right? That's very true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to comment. We had the opportunity to spend some time in New Zealand, and we had a unique experience with a lady who was raised. She was actually she was Polynesian, but she was raised in the U.S. She had relocated to New Zealand and was now working in in the corporate world. She was super frustrated. She was like, man, these people don't know how to do things on time, and everybody's just so laid back. By the way, she was from Los Angeles. And so she brought a cultural dynamic. Again, ethnically,
they were the same
as the people she's working with.
Yes.
But she brought a cultural dynamic that says punctuality, work, and private life separate. Don't tell me about what's going on in your private life.
Yeah.
I don't care what you do outside of here, but when you come here, that's the cultural lens that she was looking through.
Yeah.
But in New Zealand, it's like, hey, no worries, mate. No worries, mate. Oh, you need to, okay, go. Have some time. So completely different cultural dynamic.
Yeah.
And just seeing that play out, it was extremely interesting for us.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about communication and how the cultural dynamics of our lives, the families we grew up in, the towns, the city, maybe even the country, the continents, have an impact on how we communicate with one another. But also, not only do they impact how we communicate, they impact how this exchange happens, right?
Right. And it's important for us to recognize. That's why when we send this to you, we want you guys to take some time to understand why you get so perturbed when somebody's not on time, or why you get so perturbed when people begin to talk about their personal lives, or why you become so perturbed when someone is only short-term thinking and not long-term thinking,
or vice versa.
As important as it is for us to know this so that we can understand others, it's important for us to know this so that we can understand how we show up as well.
So in communicating, there are some things that you can do that can help this process. And I'm excited about it because first and foremost, I love being in diverse cultures. I like being around people who are not like me. Now, the truth is, we like for people to agree with us, right? But that's not the best. It is a character development for us to be around people who don't look like us, walk like us, talk like us, think like us, right? In order for us to be challenged and to grow. But involved in that process are some things that can help the communication go better. So we're going to share with you, as we're winding down, some things that we can do to help the process. And these involve listening.
Yeah.
Because listening is a huge part of communication. It's one thing to share and talk, but listening is vital.
Yes, it is. It is. So there's several different ways that we can listen. What are some of the ways that we can listen, or how do we phrase these listening styles or types? Yeah.
One of the listening styles or types that are often talked about is this thing called active listening. Now, as a married couple, right? And us engaging, we've experienced on more than one occasion some things that don't operate in active listening, showing that I'm actually really engaged with you, right? It involves communication, of course, content and delivery,
It involves you
It
looking
involves
at your home.
no, it does not. You
Does it?
cannot be an active listener doing this.
You actively
No,
ignoring.
I hear you. No. Go ahead, keep talking. Right? No, that's not active
I
listening.
can walk and chew gum at the same time. No, you can't. No, you
Right. One of the things that now this is in a context of a lot of different areas. And if you're talking to a therapist, you may sit with a therapist and see them with a notepad. But even then, most therapists are going to tell you, I want to let you know that what I'm doing is I'm keeping record of some of the things we're talking about, but I want you to know that I'm engaged with you and I'm with you. But when you're just having a regular conversation with someone, it's probably not a good idea to sit there and say, okay, well, no, hold on. I'm taking notes. Most of us take notes because we want to have
some ammunition for later on.
Right? So don't do the note-taking thing. What you can do is when the person is done, you can ask for clarity. You know, you can say, okay, what did you mean when you said? You know what I'm saying? So you could do that.
One of the challenges when it comes to being an active listener is we can sometimes be a little bit too active. It's not necessary for us to approve or disapprove of what a person shares with us.
Right.
It's important for us to listen and it's important for us to understand, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary for us to approve or disapprove, especially when we don't always know that what a person is sharing with us is, you know, the whole truth on a subject.
Right.
You know, as people say, there's two sides to every pancake.
Right. And actually there's maybe three. We always say there may be three sides.
Yep. That's your version, my version, and then there's the truth.
Yes.
Right. And so, but we were talking about one of the uniquenesses about approval and disapproval is that while we may not be able to approve or disapprove of what someone shares regarding their interactions with others.
Yes.
When a person is sharing something about themselves,
yes,
it's important for them to know that they've been heard.
Yes.
And it's important for us to perhaps approve. Now, let me give you an example of approval. An approval statement sounds like this. You know, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. And I can only imagine how painful that is. You know, it would be devastating for you, myself, or anyone to experience like that, to have an experience like that. Now, what I'm doing is I'm essentially saying that I've heard you, but, you know, I'm not going into details. Well, how dare they do X, Y, and Z to you? How dare they say so forth and so on? Because this individual is just sharing something about themselves.
Right. Thank you guys for asking questions. Vivine, here, you don't have to click that because I can read it.
I'm putting it up so they can
see. So they can see. Okay, I didn't know that technology. Thank you.
Communication.
Okay, let's see. Vivine says, what if you listen, but at the time you don't have a response and need time to think about what you are hearing? This is a great question. You want to know why? Because oftentimes we don't think that we can say that.
Yes.
We don't believe that while we're communicating with other people that we can actually stop and say, listen, you know what? I've heard you and I don't have an answer right now.
Yes.
I need to pray about that. I need to really go and pray about that. I need to process it, right? So don't be afraid to actually, now this is the thing. Some people are going to press you. And some people literally come to you because they're pressing you for an answer. They want you to give them an answer right then and there. But you cannot be afraid to say, you know what? I can't do that. I need to use some wisdom. I need to pray about it. Maybe I need to talk to some other people, or I need to think on this thing a little bit more, because a hasty answer is given. The Bible talks about that, right?
Yeah.
A hasty answer is given out of unwise thoughts.
So, and this is something else that we talked about that we don't, because again, like, yes, I want to be a better listener. I talk too much. I need to be quiet and I need to listen more. I got two ears and one mouth, but sometimes I can't stop the one mouth. And so if you're like me and you're like, man, I want to be a better listener, but how do I do that? And this is what we were talking about while we were preparing for the presentation. It's like, we actually have the freedom because, like, okay, again, my context, I'm a pastor and I talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have like 10 different things going on in my mind and I see, oh, I need to go talk to them. And oh man, I need to get them before they leave. And this, that, and the other.
Or you have a lot of people coming to you and sharing things.
And someone will come and they really want to have a conversation that requires all of my attention.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I have to listen to them because Jesus listened to everyone and he treated them like they were the only person in the world and so forth and so on. But the truth of the matter is, I
You
ain't Jesus.
Jesus.
That's the truth of the matter. And even beyond that, it is difficult for me to turn off all these other switches that are going in my mind. Guess what? I have the liberty and the freedom to do. I have the freedom to say, you know what? You deserve my full attention. You deserve to be listened to. And I can sense that what you want to share is something that's very, very important. I'm going to be honest with you. Right now, I cannot give you my full attention just because I have so many things, so many other things going on in my mind. Is it possible that we can set aside a time where we can talk, where I can be fully devoted to listening to you? Right? Like that is
saints.
We have the freedom to actually do that.
Parents who have children, who have multiple children, and all of them want, you know what I'm saying? We have to learn. I've made that mistake so many times, right? Of not being able to be honest and say, you know what, sweetheart, I want to be able to hear you, right? But I have so much stuff going on. I got this person, I got this baby, I got this thing, and it can be so difficult. But I think it requires us to be comfortable with admitting, what is it called? Admitting our imperfection.
And our humanity.
Yes, our humanity. Let's see here. Miss 240 says, yes, I realize my husband often needs time to think about it. It's helpful when someone recognizes it about him or herself, though, and says it. Yes. But, again, permission, giving people permission to have time. So I think on the opposite end, if I'm a person coming to someone and I am seeking an instant answer, but sometimes you can tell, when you're talking to somebody, you can see the struggle.
Yeah, the struggle to stay focused even.
Yes.
Because it's just like eyes darting everywhere and so forth and so on.
I'm sorry.
So there's another type of listener. There's an active listener, and then there's a
passive listener. Listen to this. Pay attention to only parts of the message. And I've been guilty of that too.
They find it hard to go beyond the surface.
Yeah.
Or catch or pick up on nonverbal context. They don't always allow others to speak without interruption, and they rarely seek clarity.
And sometimes what's happening is in passive listening, you come to the table already with your mind made up. You come to the table and you're listening for certain things. You're not listening for the whole context. I'm just focused on, I want to hear what I want to hear. And I'm and everything else kind of falls to the wayside. And I'm just picking up on the things I feel like I want to hear.
Yeah. So, and I don't even know where this comes from, but one of my friends, he would always say, so I would tell him, he asked me to do something, and I would tell him, I would say, man, no, I can't do it, man. I got this going on. And what he would say is, so what you're saying is there's hope. Right?
Like what in the world?
And it's like, if I didn't have all of this stuff going on, I would, but he's like, so what you're saying is there's hope. So and I don't know where he got it from, but that is so funny to me, because it's like, you're listening to what I'm saying, and you're picking out what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy for us to be fixated on one thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and again, we have the freedom and the liberty to be able to say, hey, stop. Can you clarify that point a little bit more?
Yeah, asking for clarity.
Because if I'm still hanging on this right here, then I can't listen to what you're saying. Look, instead, why don't I just ask you to stop and clarify this? So let's spend a little bit more time on that right there.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is, by the way, phones down.
Yes. Phones,
computers,
newspapers, nail clippers, even like giving people your undivided. Now but hold on, because again, recently,
here's the cultural dynamic.
I'm realizing, right, and because of what I do for a living as well, right, as a grief recovery specialist and working with people and mental health coaching, everybody's not the same, right? There are some people, if you look them in the eye while they're speaking to you, that is offensive to them. And I'm like, oh wow, but we're taught that if you do not, that people do not think that you're listening.
But remember, you are taught that from a particular cultural perspective.
Yes.
I've had the opportunity to travel to South Korea.
I've been selective hearing.
And I was in South Korea. I was teaching English, and I remember it was the weirdest thing in the classroom. I was trying to get the students to pronounce, and so I wanted them to watch my lips as I pronounced, but none of the students would lift their heads.
Oh, this was in Korea.
This was in 1999.
Yeah.
And all the students were like this. And I said, hey, look at me, and they were just like, they were afraid. And so someone brought to my attention, like, hey, you do know that here in South Korea, it's kind of a sign of disrespect for the students to look the teacher directly in their eyes. I had no concept or clue whatsoever that that's what was going on. So again, there are different cultural, and we don't, the point is this, we don't even need to be from a different continent to experience cultural dynamics and differences that affect our ability to communicate well.
Very true.
We might have grown up in the same context on the same continent, and still those things can provide difficulty.
Question, we're going to move forward, but how many of you work in a multicultural context? How many of you work with people that are not from your town, the country you were born and raised in? So cultural context, how many of you work in a multicultural environment? All right. Let's see here. So another one of the barriers to communication is not listening at all. Like completely not listening. You are not engaged. You're not looking at the person. You swinging around in your chair. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't do that. Okay. You're just not engaged at all whatsoever. Right. And that actually speaks to people. How you're sitting also can, like, oh my goodness,
Or somebody says, we talked about that. And you're like, when did we talk about that?
Right.
I don't ever remember having that conversation. They're like, well, we
sat
right here
in the meeting.
It was at this time. It was that, and they're like, and that's because they were tuned out.
Yes,
they weren't listening.
And I want to point out too something that's important. If you are a person who is experiencing, and this is for the person who's communicating with another individual, there are sometimes people who are going through things. Right. There are plenty of us who can sit in meetings and we're not even there.
That's right.
We're not even present. We are dealing with turmoil, stress. We're dealing with family problems. We're dealing with all kinds of things, right? And while our bodies may be present, our minds are completely absent from where we are. So that can happen where you're like, man, what were you doing, Bob? Bob is like, man, you know what? I just wasn't even connected.
Absolutely. Then there are marginal listeners and evaluative listeners. Marginal listeners, they're in and out of your conversation and my conversation and everybody else's conversation. Then there are evaluative listeners, and it may sound like this is good, and this is where I am sometimes. I tend to focus, speaking of those cultural dynamics we mentioned earlier, I'll tend to focus on words. I no, you said this, you said that, this, that, and the other. But there is a difference between knowing the words that someone has spoken and actually hearing an individual. There's a big difference.
You're pointing something out here, and I want to put this out there when it comes to communication. Words mean different things to different people, everybody. One word can mean something to you, and it can mean something completely different to another individual. And we think that we have said or heard something, and we are completely on two separate islands.
That's right.
So remember that. And the way to deal with that is there's nothing wrong with asking for clarity.
Yeah.
Did you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying? Can you explain back to me? Or you can say, man, you know what? Let me make sure I understand you. This is what I hear you saying.
Right. Right. So the other thing is, lastly, there are defensive listeners.
Yeah.
And I think all of us have a black belt in defensive listening. All of us have a license to carry defensive filtered ears. All of us have that.
Yes.
Because we know how to listen to protect me.
Yes.
To defend me.
Yes.
Right. We know how to do that so that nothing that is said that I perceive is negative. And we touched a little bit on shame last night. Nothing that's going to evoke these deep feelings of shame.
Yes.
I'm not going to allow anything to hit me.
Yes.
And we're waxing on and waxing off like Danielson and Mr. Miyagi, because we're going to make sure
that I'm right.
That nobody is able to say anything that I feel like affects me or hurts me.
I like this. It says takes comments as a personal attack, misinterprets or projects feelings of insecurity, jealousy, guilt, or lack of confidence onto other person, wants to protect self, tends to make excuses, attempts to shift blame, may fear being abandoned, feelings of inferiority, or struggling with low self-esteem. Sarcasm can also be triggers.
Oh, man.
Triggers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Oh, doesn't want to take any ownership. It's
Mm-mm.
always someone else's
Mhm.
fault, man. Defensive listening.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just, even if you're doing the mental gymnastics in your mind and you're like, no, that's
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
No, I didn't do that. No, even if that's what's going, please don't let your mouth say anything. Just be quiet and just receive it. Just receive it and go back and reflect on it.
Yes. And I was going to say, if we could end on something, these are two of the most powerful tools you can have. If you don't pick up on any of these other things, I want you all to remember this. One is you do not have to respond right away. You do not. The best thing to do is to wait and pray. That's one. Okay. So if you're not sure if it's a heated situation, and we've all probably made those mistakes before, you look back like, man, I wish I would have done that. I shouldn't have. You know what I'm saying? You just wait. Give it a different time. If you're not if you're hungry, what they say, you don't do things when you're hungry, you tired, frustrated, all these different things. If you know that that's where your mind is, then don't communicate right then and there. Give it time. Okay.
But you need to ask for that.
Yes.
Don't just ignore.
Don't dismiss.
Don't dismiss.
Yeah.
Say, hey, listen, I want to have this conversation, but now is probably not the best time. Can I talk to you in 2 hours?
Yes.
And what you've done is you specified the time, not I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah.
And then in 3 weeks, you haven't had the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other things is ask questions, get clarity on things. Those things will help to be able to diminish a lot of the frustration.
And listen, it's like the teachers used to tell us when we were growing up, the only dumb question is the one that we don't ask.
Yeah.
So here's something, and I'm learning this, you're learning it too.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay if I ask you about what you shared, or do you just want me to listen?
Yes.
It's okay. It's okay to ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say, do you want my feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to know what I think?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you just want me to listen?
Mm-hmm.
And give the individual who's speaking, give them the ability to say, I just want you to listen. Or no, when I finish, I would like to hear what you think. Right?
Now, when you say you want to hear what people think, realize that they may not think the way you think.
Hey.
So when you ask for a reply or a response, realize if you get one that doesn't match which matches yours, well, you asked for a different perspective, right? And so, keeping that in mind as well. All right.
Well, listen.
Oh man,
we've reached the end of our time. There's so much more
so many
we
things
could share with you all, but we don't want to keep you beyond this time.
Yes.
I'm going to,
and I forgot.
I'm
sorry, y'all. This was the other ones. I said there was 2 things. Agree where at all possible. That is another powerful tool. You don't have to agree about every single thing, but you can pray and say, God, where do I find the place that I can agree with this person? You know what I'm saying? Fight for it. Find something. You may not agree with anything, and I'm not saying you have to, but where at all possible, find agreement in those, even if it's that 1%. That
1%.
That's right.
Yep. All right. Well, listen, we hope that your communication is enhanced by understanding your cultural context and understanding the cultural context of the various people that you're in community with.
Yeah.
We hope that you will become an avid listener.
Yeah.
We hope that you will take the black belt of defensive listening off, and that you will become, an engaged, active listener.
Yeah.
So we're going to pray to that end tonight. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you guys for commenting as well. We appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Father in heaven, thank you so very much for giving us 2 ears and for giving us a mind to be able to process the things that we hear. I pray that we would hear more than just people's words, but that we would hear their hearts. I pray that you would help us where it is applicable and where we can to be able to find either our 1% if it's a conflict, or find points where we can agree with people in or outside of conflict. Thank you for helping us to become better communicators, speakers, and listeners. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, guys. It was so good to be with you tonight. Don't forget to come back tomorrow. Make sure that you like and you subscribe to the Troy YouTube channel. If you are on Stamina for Life, you can subscribe, you can share, you can invite people to come back and join. Go back and look at some of the other videos if you have not already watched them. We are going to be back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we have some guests that are going to be coming this week as well, right?
Yes, we have guests that'll be joining us.
Yeah.
On Thursday and Friday, I believe. Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
So remember the things that we're sharing with you. Some of them you will receive them in an email. That's why we asked you to register.
Yeah.
And so if you go to troysdachurch.com, if you haven't registered and you'd like those materials, then please register and we will make sure that we send those to you.
And we're also going to have a question and answer period as well, guys, on Saturday night, right? So if you have any questions or anything, make sure you send those to, what's the email?
Yep.
What is it called?
It's called troysdachurch.com.
Okay. So make sure you go there and send your questions. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.